The classic book detailing UK alien abduction cases without consent has been updated. Philip Mantle and Carl Nagaitis are the authors, with Philip Mantle well versed in the area of alien abductions after heavily researching and working with Calvin Parker on the famous Pascagoula incident. Without Consent was first published in 1994, and Philip Mantle joins us now. Hello, Philip.
Nice to speak to you again, Dean.
Without Consent, by golly, it's 26 years since it was first published. How many times has it been updated?
This is the second time that the book has been updated. Originally in 1994, it came out in hardback first, and then a few years later, we launched it in a paperback format. So we updated it a little bit for the paperback, and then it's just been left dormant ever since. And like you said, after working with Calvin Parker this last couple of years, I came to the conclusion, rightly or wrongly, Dean, that there still is a lot of interest in this particular area of the UFO subject. And I looked around, and I think, I may be mistaken, but I think Without Consent is still the first and only book that deals with this phenomena from a UK perspective. So I thought, well, you know, I've continued down the years, you know, speaking to people, interviewing them, collecting data. Well, why not update it for, you know, the present day audience? As we know, Dean, you know, lots of new people join the subject every year, so they will have no idea about Without Consent and what it originally was. So I decided to go ahead, and hey presto, it's out now.
Well, the alien abduction topic and I guess the contact experience topic has just exploded in the last few years, with so many people now coming out and telling their story. Have you seen somewhat of a change in attitude towards alien abductions from the public in the last 26 years?
There's been a change all around, Dean. I mean, if we go back to, you know, the early 1990s, Without Consent originally was designed as a television documentary. My colleague Carl Nagaitis was a long-standing professional journalist working in what was Fleet Street. He's worked for some of the biggest newspapers in the country. And I'd done a couple of features with Carl. He left journalism and set up his own public relations company. And one of his clients was a television production company who said, "You don't happen to know anybody in the UFO field, do you?" And he said, "Well, it just so happens." And they originally commissioned for me and Carl to research and write a documentary, which we did. But then they pulled the plug. For whatever reason, it never got made. So we turned it into a book instead. Now, in those days, of course, we're talking, you know, pre-internet, really. We knew of a few sort of well-known cases, but getting people to talk, Dean, was very difficult, you know. So I literally, along with Carl, traveled from one end of the UK to the other, interviewing as many people as I could in person. And you'll see in the book, there's a few pseudonyms we've used because people didn't want their real names revealed and that kind of thing, which is fine. But what I have noticed down the years, still keeping in touch with the subject, is that both abductees, as I'll still call them, and the general public are much more willing now to be accepted. There still is a stigma attached to the subject, let's make no mistake about that. But I found that more and more people are willing to say, look, I don't care what others think. This is what happened to me. This is what I remember. And that's it. You know, you either believe me or you don't. I don't really care. And at this moment in time, with this last couple of years, there's been an increased interest in the subject for a variety of reasons. So I think the general public is much more accepting than it was when we first published the book. So that kind of interest goes in peaks and troughs, Dean, as I'm sure you're aware. But you know, I think at the moment, because of certain things that have happened, and people are more willing to say, well, perhaps there is something to this after all.
Well, I've probably recorded probably 30 interviews just on people who what are termed as contact experience or abductees just in the last, I'd say, probably 8 months. I'd imagine if I tried to do that 26 years ago, it'd take me forever to get that number of people to come forward and speak about it.
Absolutely. You know, we had the same problem originally. That's why the original publication, when it came out in hardback, was somewhere around 60,000 words, which is not a lot for a book of that. You know, it's sort of on the low side. But when you see the book now, it's probably twice that size. You know, simply because more people are willing to speak either openly or, you know, yes, I'll tell you, but you know, please don't mention my name because of my career or family or, you know, whatever reason. So there is, you know, it's a lot easier now. And of course, we have all the media's changed. We have all the technology to help. You know, thankfully, for the updated version, I didn't have to go careering up and down the UK again. You know, so it was a lot easier in that respect.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you know, it's not surprising to hear you say that, Dean. I would totally agree with you there.
Yeah, yeah, and also, you know, a lot of skeptics will say, well, they've only come out because, you know, they can get a book deal and they can get a bit of fame. But to be honest, there is a very, very, very low percentage of people who have come out and spoken about their situation that are making, you know, even a minute amount of money. I mean, books don't really make you money.
No, I mean, you know, I hope this sells a few copies, but none of the individuals involved will you know, are in it for the money. Like I say, a number of them were reluctant to come forward in the first place. But what we have emphasised, and I think this will come across in the interviews you've done, is that these people are just like you and I. They're everyday folk. The last thing that was on their mind when they had these experiences was UFOs. Most of them had no connection to it or very little knowledge of it at all. You know, they were going home from work, out walking their dog, taking a walk in the fields, you know, whatever. One of whom, you know, one of the gentlemen in the book is a police officer. He was actually in his patrol car on duty at the time. You know, all he was looking for some cows that had gone missing overnight. All he was thinking is, let me find these cows and let me get clocked off for the night, you know. You know, we've remarked that the Alien Abduction Club is probably one of the only clubs that no one wants to be a member of, Dean. You know, it's as simple as that. And these individuals are as puzzled and bewildered as the rest of us. After we published the original version of the book, we did a little poll, and we asked the experiencers, the abductees, what do you think happened to you? You know, here I am on the outside looking in.
Yep.
Some said definitely thought these were, you know, aliens from wherever. A couple of others thought this was some kind of spiritual experience. Others said, I just, no idea, Philip. That's why we came to you, hoping you might be able to tell us, you know. So even the abductees themselves were you know, had different opinions about what happened. And I think the skeptical viewpoint has moved somewhat as well. You mentioned the last couple of years I've been working with a well-known abductee by the name of Calvin Parker in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I won't go into his story because it's a long one anyway. But I read an article written by arch skeptic Philip Klass back in the 1970s when Calvin's encounter took place. And he just dismissed it as a hoax, you know, as simple as that. And then I moved forward in time to the current batch of skeptics. And I read another article by a skeptical researcher, part of the same organization that Philip Klass was. And he now doesn't say that Calvin Parker and Charlie Hickson's incident was a hoax. He says it was some kind of psychological phenomena. So even the skeptics, although I don't think they realize this, Dean, have moved themselves. They're now saying, yes, these people do have a genuine experience. but we just believe we've got an answer for it. So, there's been a shift in that respect as well.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence is so overwhelming now that I think the skeptics themselves are frightened to come out and pour hot water on any claim.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you one example that still baffles me to this day. There's a lady in the book called Jane Murphy, and Jane didn't live far from where I did. She initially contacted me about a UFO sighting she'd had as a teenager. So I went along to interview her because she was close by. And she went on to tell me she'd had this very complicated abduction experience as well when she was in her 20s. She was the same age as me, but then these experiences had continued. Now, again, this was long before the internet. Jane had no interest in the subject. There were no UFO books or magazines in her house. I met her husband, I met her family. And she was experiencing, when she had these experiences, she says, I felt as if I was pregnant, Philip. But of course I wasn't. She already had a daughter, so she knew what pregnancy was like. And she said, I had these strange visions of having a child with these creatures that's half human and half alien. And she described it as looking like one of the cheap dolls you used to buy as a kid, and it had all this awful hair in it. Now, I used to transcribe all these interviews with her, and they were then in the mail, because there was no email. They were in the post to Bud Hopkins in New York. I knew Bud at this point very well. And of course, he was talking about the same type of experiences, but across the Atlantic. Bud coined them the smart baby dreams. And these were what some of the abductees he was working with had also experienced. So my question was, how do you get a lady on one side of the Atlantic experiencing something exactly the same as somebody else 3,000 or 4,000 miles away on the other side of the Atlantic without reading any of Bud's work? Bud, this wasn't in any of Bud's books at the times, it still baffles me. She was just an ordinary lady with a partner and a daughter, and she was convinced they were aliens. But how come individuals thousands of miles apart, Dean, report the same thing? I mean, you tell me.
Yeah, it's amazing. I found experiences in my interviews to be some of the most sincere and courageous people I've met.
Yeah.
And just to come out and talk about it. Kathy Martin, since she's been, been leading the experiencer research team at MUFON, she said to me recently that they field, over 100 calls a month from people who have had abduction experiences. And I remember asking her one time, well, what do you think the numbers run into? Are we talking thousands? And she says, you want to try millions?
Well, yeah. Well, it's the same when Whitley Strieber wrote his famous book, Communion. I think Whitley was inundated with letters from people around the world who had seen the same thing as pictured on the front of his book, of course. So that'll give you some idea. Also, when Without Consent first came out, we managed to get it in some of the national newspapers here. That was through Carl's connections in the newspaper industry. And I literally have a file still here now. I've been looking through it recently of all the letters from people that wrote in as a result of reading some of the things we wrote about, back in the early 1990s. And of course, I corresponded with them all, and some of them, I went on to meet and interview, but I still have that file of letters. And like you say, whenever you do anything like this, people come out of the woodwork who have never spoken before. A lot of them, of course, Dean, were just happy to have someone to talk to about it.
Yeah.
Without them laughing, without them passing judgment. You'd almost act as like an unqualified counselor in that respect, because some of them have spoken to their family. They don't know what to do. They may have gone to the medical profession. What they're going to do to you? With Jane, they give her some pills to put her to sleep.
Yeah.
I won't repeat what she told the doctor. The pills didn't work. So, you know, so they end up, rightly or wrongly, with a UFO researcher a lot of the time, because they're the only ones that will sit down and listen without passing judgment and say, well, you're not, you know, you're not the only one. And some of them, you know, like victims of abuse sometimes, Dean, think that this has only ever happened to them and no one else, you know, or just a few people. And they're as amazed as anyone else to find that this has happened to lots of other people, you know.
Yeah. Erin Montgomery, who I spoke with a few weeks ago, she just released a book titled Dirty Little Secrets, and she's been a lifelong experiencer. She's also a marriage therapist, and we spent part of the interview talking about the relationship issues that being an experiencer can cause, where, say, if you're married, if your husband or your wife doesn't believe what you're saying, and what kind of pressure that can put on a marriage. Yep. Is that something you found with the people that you've spoken to?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, again, we'll go back to Jane, you know, her partner, he had no idea what to do, you know, and I think it caused a few arguments. And then I spoke to her mum and dad, and believe it or not, one night a mum thought she'd seen something, and she said, "It's not me you want, it's our Jane," you know. And she kind of laughed. She said, you know, it was just an instant reaction, because obviously Jane had spoken about this with her family. And, you know, her partner was grateful that, you know, I was there and I'm taking some notice, because he had no idea what to do. He was a motor mechanic, you know, what can I do? You know, and it did cause some tension. It really did. But on the other hand, there's been others that were more supporting, and others that just kind of shrugged their shoulders and are as baffled as their partners are about what's been happening. And frustrated, I think, because some of them have never seen anything or experienced anything themselves. So there is a mix, but yes, that it does cause some friction at times.
Yeah. Nick Pope wrote a foreword in the book, and he says that Without Consent should be treated as a detective story where the authors examine what literally might be a crime against humanity. Was this your intention when you produced the book?
Not at all, you know, and Nick had, you know, a full range to write whatever forward he saw fit. There was no wink, wink, nudge, nudge, or please, you know, put this in. I mean, you know, that's the way Nick works. I mean, I'd known Nick since his days at the Ministry of Defence, and he's since gone on to write his own books, of course. And so no, you know, you know, like I said, the original intention was this was going to be a TV documentary. But when we changed it, the format, into a book, our intention was to show that the skeptics were wrong, because they would have you believe that these kind of experiences only happen to kooks out in the middle of nowhere somewhere, usually in America, the middle of the desert, up the mountains. Well, you know, Britain's a small place, Dean. You can't get that far from civilization. So we tried to emphasize that these were just Joe Public, you know, going about their everyday lives when these experiences happen. We even look at some possible alternatives for what they may have experienced. And we asked, like I said, we asked the individuals themselves what they thought had happened to them. One gentleman made quite a statement that still stays with me today, Dean. It's called John Day. His encounter happened in the 1970s at a place called Aveley in Essex. It's not in the middle of nowhere. It's only 40 miles from London. And him and his wife and their children had been to their in-laws that night. They were driving home. I won't go into all the details again of the encounter because it's quite lengthy. But I asked John, you know, I interviewed him in person, so he sat in front of me. Was this experience real? Was it, you know, was this a physical reality experience? And what John said to me, he's always stayed with me, I think it's quite profound. He says, Philip, not only do I not have the words to tell you what happened to me, we as a species don't have them. This is the best way I can describe it to you, is that if you go to a movie set, a film set, you can touch it, feel it, you can knock on it, and it's physically real. But then you look around the back of it, and it's all one big illusion.
Yeah.
And make of that what you will, Dean. You know, and you know, I found it quite profound. I still don't fully understand it, but I shall never forget it. You know, and his story has stuck with me, you know, ever since. And I'm one of the few people to interview John, and I'm very grateful for what he had to say. So make of that what you will.
Yeah, yeah. One of the other stories I found fascinating in the book, I forget his surname, a guy you were calling David, who spotted or was hearing a humming sound, went outside to investigate, and the next thing you know, he's being escorted onto a ship and talked about, you know, being left in a room, and he thought he was being observed.
Yeah, and that's David Rogers.
Right.
And that's his real name. I mean, again, I've known David quite a long time. David's one of these gentlemen that's had a number of experiences down the years. And I think he talks about having a 30-year span of experiences or something in that nature. He ended up with that encounter that you've just described there. You know, we're going, one minute he's here, the next minute he's in this craft, call it what you will, and he's been observed. David's worked in the television industry for quite a number of years. He's a very well-educated man. And he's no idea, you know, he can't figure it out for himself. He just knows that all these things have happened to him down the decades. So for David, it wasn't just a one-off. You know, a number of things have happened. But then there are others in the book where it was simply a one-off. And I mentioned briefly the police officer. He's known as Alan Godfrey. And this was in 1980. I think it was November 1980. Alan was on patrol in his car at a place called Todmorden, which is in West Yorkshire. And he was finishing his night shift, and he had been looking for some cows that had escaped. Hadn't found them. It had been raining. He went into what you would call the town centre. It's only a small place. He saw an officer on foot patrol, said, I'm going to take one last look for these cows, and then that's my shift finished. So he's driving up through the main road through Todmorden, and up ahead he sees a light. And he says, what's that? Because he was going to turn off the main road, but he didn't. And he says, it's this object blocking the road. He got close enough to it. It's like an old-fashioned child's spinning top with a bank of panels across it. The underneath was spinning. Mm-hmm. And he stopped the patrol car. He tried to get through to, you know, the police station on his radio, but he couldn't. So, like a lot of policemen, he took his notebook out, decided to draw this thing. Next thing he knows, he's several hundred yards further down the road, now driving the patrol car.
Wow.
And he turns around and this thing has gone. So he drives back to the spot where it was. And like I said, it had been raining that night, but the area of the tarmac on the road was dry. And he said you could see the debris, you know, there was some trees and what have you, all in a circular fashion. He went back to the police station. He reported it. Upon getting changed, he found that his big, thick police boots had a split across the bottom on one of them. And he also had a burn on the instep of his foot, on his ankle. Mm-hmm. No idea how that had happened, you know. So this bothered Alan. He reported it officially. He wrote a report at the request of his commanding officer at the police force. About 6 months later, Alan underwent regressive hypnosis. He went under hypnosis 3 times, and it was professional psychiatrists that did this. So this is not some just street hypnotist, you know, some stage magician. Mm-hmm. And at the end of each session, Alan wasn't allowed to remember anything that had happened. But what they did, they filmed it. So they invited Alan along one night and they showed him the film. I'm one of the few people that's actually seen that particular video film. So we're talking the early 1980s here, so the quality wasn't that great. Mm-hmm. And you know, Alan was the kind of police officer, Dean, you didn't really want to mess with.
Right.
You know, no nonsense. If it was a minor incursion, he would have just told you not to be so silly, probably using a bit more harsher language. But if you wanted to mess around, he was not the type of guy you should be messing with, you know?
Yeah.
So no nonsense. He got commendations for his work as a police officer. And you see the hypnosis, and what Alan does, he throws his hands up over his face like that, and he takes a deep breath in, and he says, there's a light. And he describes, you know, seeing these beings being asked to get on a table. And he says, I'm not getting on it. And then the next thing he knows, he's on it.
Yeah.
You know, he gets on it as if somebody's pulling strings. And then he says, out of the blue, he says, how did you do that? So the hypnotist saying, what do you mean, Alan? He says, well, I can hear them talking, but they're not moving their mouths. And he was asking these creatures how they did that, you know, because it surprised him. And, you know, so what I did for this version of the book, this is what I'm getting to with this, Dean, I had an audio recording of that hypnosis session.
Wow.
Not a video, I had the audio. So I transcribed the audio word for word, and I placed that in the book. That wasn't in the original version. So you can read exactly word for word what Alan has to say. Now, in fairness to Alan, you know, he retired from the police force a couple of years later because he got injured in the line of duty. He's done many interviews, and he said, Philip, you know, if I'd have got out, I mean, he said, if I'd have had a brick in my hand or a stone, I could have thrown it at that thing and it would have gone clunk.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Quite literally. But he always said, you know, the hypnosis is the hypnosis. Make of it what you will. And he did some drawings of the creatures he saw, because at one point he kind of recoils, because one of the beings he saw, he looks pretty much like you and I.
Yep.
You know, it was a little small man with a little white beard and a skull cap, but then he recoils and he says, ugh, look at them, you know, like these, he sees these other ugly things as well, you know, and I'm you know, I have friends who are extremely skeptical, but they're still fascinated by Alan's particular incident. What is curious, of course, Alan's report that he was asked to officially write, which he did, and that was sent to the Ministry of Defence here in the UK. When the MOD UFO files were released, you know, Alan's report is nowhere to be found. Okay, you know, it could be a clerical error, it could be sat in another filing cabinet somewhere, or it could have ended up in the waste paper bin. But the fact is, it's not there, you know, and it should be.
Yeah. That's classic alien abduction scenario too, because what I found with a lot of abductees is that, and now it could be a warning for others, but they say they saw a UFO close up. And now I'm thinking every time someone seems to see a UFO close up, their memory becomes kind of hazy. And with regression therapy now popular today, people are having therapy and they're suddenly finding out that they saw a UFO close up, not knowing them, but they were actually abducted at the time and have no memory of it. So missing time is a big factor here.
Yeah, I mean, what I've done, Carl and I, in the book, we've put a number of missing time encounters in there. We call it the nearly files. You know, one particular incident that stood out for me was two friends. They're called Bobby and Vicky. That's their real names. I just haven't used their full names. They lived right down on the south coast of England. And they were going to visit Bobby's grandmother. Now, this is a route that they drove up into the Midlands. It was a couple of hours drive. You know, they'd done it several times before. Bobby always liked to look smart for a grandma, you know, cheered the grandmother up. So she had a white coat that she just had cleaned. It was all ready. She put that in the back of the car. She had a baby. That was in the back of the car. So their visit to grandma with her friend was uneventful, you know, drove there, had tea with Grandma, see you later. Driving back home, Bobby's in the passenger seat, and she looked to her left and she saw this object disappear behind a hill. Obviously, a friend who's driving didn't see it, but then they both noticed the exit sign for where they should be leaving the motorway. They saw the same exit twice.
Wow.
And that kind of bothered them. So when they got home, bearing in mind they'd done this journey before, there was some, I think it's around about 40 minutes late, because they were calling at a particular shop and it was just about to close, and they thought, it's closing early. And then they checked the watch. No, it's not. It's closing bang on time. It should. It's us that's late. So when they got back to Bobby's house, she takes the coat out of the back of the car, which she just had cleaned and she hadn't worn that day, and it was covered in mud. And she was covered in, her boots were covered in mud. Now, they hadn't been anywhere muddy. And like I say, the coat hadn't been anywhere.
Yeah.
So they started having these, both ladies having these visions of this hill, of this UFO going behind it. And they left it at that, you know, because from where I live, it was like a 4 or 5 hour drive to get to interview them. They were wanting to follow it up. Bobby's husband was in the Royal Navy, so he was away for months on end, you know. And she had told him, but they didn't know what to make of it. They were considering hypnosis, but I think they just left it there. So we've put several instances of missing time in what we call our nearly files, to give you a bit of an idea of what we're talking about, and that's one of them.
Yeah, that's very similar to, I mean, probably the most famous case of them all, because it was, I think, the first really publicised, the Betty and Barney Hill case back in '61. So I suppose if there's a message here for people, if you see a UFO close up, run.
Oh, yeah.
Philip, alien abductions have somewhat been perceived to be an American phenomenon, but I know they're not. Is that another reason why you produced the book?
Absolutely. Like we said, you know, from a skeptical point of view, I'll change what I said, a debunker's point of view. You know, I consider myself fairly skeptical. You know, for me, a skeptic just asks questions. Debunkers just say it cannot be, and that's it.
Yeah.
So a lot of debunkers would have us believe that, you know, these kind of encounters only took place in the outbacks of the United States or similar locations, but certainly the US. You know, it was some drunken redneck, you know, and so we try and emphasize in the book that this is not the case. These instances happen everywhere.
Yeah.
And again, we try and reinforce it, that they happen to your everyday Joe, you and me, everyday Joe public. You know, a gentleman's on his way to visit his girlfriend, Bobby and Vicky, you know, coming back from grandma's. Alan Godfrey sat in his police patrol car, you know, looking at this thing with his, you know, wondering what on earth is this? And he's drawing it on his notebook, you know, and so on. You know, a wide variety of people from a wide variety of backgrounds right across the UK. So that was one of the reasons we just stuck to the UK only. It wasn't just something that happened, you know, to the Americans, you know, with a disdainful sort of slant on the Americans, because it's not true.
Yeah.
You know, yes, the abduction phenomena first came to light, as you said, with Betty and Barney Hill in the 1960s, but but other cases, you know, have been uncovered in different parts of the world that predate that, of course.
Yeah.
And that's the same here in the UK. So that was an emphasis on it as well, Dean, to show that this is just not a phenomenon that happens across the Atlantic.
Yeah, there were three famous cases, call them the big trifecta in the 70s, with Calvin's Pascagoula incident, 73, Travis Walton in 75, and then Terry Lovelace in 77 with the incident at Devil's Den. And they've been three of my favourite cases to research. But when I got a chance to speak with Tiago Tchetti in Brazil, you know, when he released his book a few months ago, and I was going through some of the cases there, and I thought to myself then, I thought, if these happened in the United States, they'd make movies out of them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I actually published that book, you know, UFO Contacts in Brazil. A fascinating book, recommend it to everyone. And that, what you see in Tiago's book is probably only a fraction of the kind of data that is available to our colleagues in Brazil. And you're right, they would have made headlines. And it's one of the reasons why, you know, some people will know me that I run my own little publishing business called Flying Disc Press. And it's one of the reasons, Dean, I've tried to publish books from other researchers in different countries. Tiago in Brazil, Dr. Dan Farkas in Romania, I can never pronounce his name right, Piotr Chelebius in Poland, you know, and some of those cases are absolutely fascinating, Dean, you know, and what it does show is that whatever this phenomenon is, it is truly international. It knows of no borders, it recognizes no borders. And as you said, you interviewed Tiago yourself, and what a fascinating area of research he's been involved in. Yeah,
and the thing I noticed about the Brazil encounters, they were particularly nasty.
Yeah, well, what tends to happen sometimes, not in all cases, Dean, is that there is a cultural influence, if you like, you know, and I'm talking about UFOs in general here. For example, there's a number of cases in Brazil where the witnesses have ended up, you know, either being severely injured or even dead, you know, deceased.
Yeah.
If you go back to Voronezh in Russia in the late 1980s, a UFO landing case with creatures there. The creatures were described as being, you know, seven feet plus tall, which is reminiscent of the, you know, the Russian bear were big and tough and strong. If you look at Latin America, there seem to be the little ugly goblin-like creatures, you know. So there is a cultural influence on things as well. What that says about the phenomena, of course, is another discussion somewhere else, I think.
Yeah.
But yes, you're spot on there.
So the book Without Consent, probably easiest place to grab a copy is Amazon.
Absolutely, just, you know, it's there in paperback format or a Kindle. So if you want to download it to whatever computer system you use or your phone or whatever, I wouldn't know how to do that myself, but I know it's available, you know. Yeah. So yeah, just go to Amazon.
Yeah. Have you got an audio version available?
No, there's no audio version at the moment. You know, I seem to have published quite a number of books down the years, and getting them done as audio books is something we're looking to explore in the future. Yep.
Let's just change tack as we head towards time here. Of course, you're pretty well involved with the famous alien autopsy film that popped up in the 90s, and that you mentioned before we started to interview. It's coming up on the 25th year anniversary. I can't believe it's gone that fast.
Yeah. I mean, the alien autopsy film, love or hate it, was released on television on August the 28th, 1995. You know, I still had all my hair at that point, and it wasn't grey either, Dean, you know, so that's 25 years. It's almost upon us, you know, a couple of weeks away, just over. Yeah. And, you know, I've said all along, you know, for a long time, this film will never die. I even made a comment online today that I think the film is almost reaching legendary status. I don't mean that it's great. I mean that it's becoming a legend.
Yeah.
The story surrounding it is now within the realms of myth and legend. You know, the people involved, some of them, not all of them, but are changing their stories or adding to it. And you have certain researchers who have no idea what they're talking about, you know, expanding the myth. And I don't think it'll ever go away, Dean. I really don't.
Right. Now, you've made a documentary. So what can people expect to see in the film?
Well, what I did, again, I've released my book called Roswell Alien Autopsy this year. I've done a revised edition of that. I've done it in a large 8x10 format.
Mm-hmm.
So in there's lots of pictures, original faxes, letters, transcripts, you know, the whole gamut is in there. And then I worked with a production company here in the UK, and we made a 4-part documentary series called Alien Autopsy, The Search for Answers. So it's a retrospective title of the series. So that's on Amazon Prime and Apple iTunes, and it is pretty much based on my book. So it starts basically with a little, for those that don't know, a little telling of the Roswell story.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, 90% of this 4-part series details my investigation into the Alien Autopsy film. The man who released it, of course, was Ray Santilli. He's interviewed it in the series. A very rare appearance by Ray. He doesn't come out of his bunker very often now, wherever.
No,
he's interviewed in there. So, and again, you know, we use some archive material as well. So it tells the whole story of the alien. It still allows you to make up your own mind, you know, at the end of the day. But I leave nobody in any way, shape, or form misinformed that it is a hoax. And I tell the people who were behind it all, who were involved, you know, photographs of them. So it's all there. And, you know, I'm very pleased with it. I know the production company is. And to such an effect, I'm going to make another documentary with them. But that's another story. But, so yeah, it's Alien Autopsy, The Search for Answers. So, you know, if you're interested in that, you can take a look. Yeah,
and of course there is a trailer. And people can have a look at the trailer. The trailer itself is pretty compelling too. The fact that it was a fake, Philip, I know I've asked you this before, but do you think it did more harm than good, or more good than harm to the validity of the ufology topic?
I think it did a lot of good, believe it or not, Dean, because when it first came out back in 1995, it was a huge story, and I mean huge. You know, it was shown on Fox in the United States on a show called Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction. It was so popular that they ordered the producer, a gentleman by the name of Bob Kiviat, to make 2 more specials, you know, and he had to, such was the interest. And of course, it was then broadcast around the world, you know, dozens of different countries. What it did, it raised the interest in Roswell,
mm-hmm.
the UFO subject in general. You know, I have a colleague here in the UK who complained about it at the time, and I just happened to find out from her publisher that she had a UFO book out at the time, and such was the interest, they had to reprint it as a result. As well, you're not complaining about the royalties you're about to receive, you know, but that's the kind of effect it had. And of course, yes, there was people, you know, said it's a fake, it's a hoax. Well, that's the easy option. So I carried on, and I got to the bottom of it eventually. So even then, we can show that it was a UFO researcher, i.e. me, assisted by others, that finally got to the bottom of this. It wasn't Philip Glass or his equivalent, you know, it was UFO research that stuck with the story and
mm-hmm.
finally proved it to be a fake.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah, it was an amazing time. Philip, that's the Alien Autopsy film. Is the documentary, where is that available? Amazon?
Yeah, you get it on Amazon Prime, and it's on Apple iTunes. That's Alien Autopsy, The Search for Answers.
Okay.
Of course, my book, Roswell Alien Autopsy, that too is on Amazon.
Fantastic. Philip, always a pleasure speaking with you, and we'll speak again soon.
My pleasure, Dean. Thank you very much.
Philip Mantle joining us.